Tonight, the Obsidian Crucible Academy is not on Earth. It is on Surtara, a heavy gravity world where the air tastes like sulfur and every mistake costs breath. This academy does not teach theory. It measures what you do when the planet itself tries to force you down. Quinn is a new cadet from Earth. Officially, she is here on exchange program. Unofficially, Helion Vanguard want a clean answer. If a human enters the harshest training pipeline in the sector, do they break or do they adapt? The other cadets do not know what to call her. Some stare like she is a rumor. Some avoid her like she is trouble. And a few look at her like a target they can use to prove this academy still belongs to them. Commandant Sarik Vin watches her without warmth. He opens her file and finds a blank where her hazard rating should be. That blank bothers him more than any warning label, because missing data is never random. And if Mara survives Surtara, someone will have to explain why she was sent here in the first place. On the planet Surtara, Obsidian Crucible Academy did not teach theory. It filtered bodies under weight and sulfur wind. The air tasted like sulfur through every seal, and the gravity made every mistake expensive. If you could not stand fast enough, the academy left you where you fell. A stretcher sled scraped over black rock as a squad of new cadets hauled a limp training dummy toward the boundary lights. The dummy was packed with dense mass, built to feel like a real person in heavy gravity. Hands shook and knees buckled, but the sled kept grinding forward anyway. A siren cut the morning in half. "Move," Commandant Sarik Vin said. A training round snapped into the dirt beside the sled and kicked up red grit. The cadets flinched and pulled harder. Quinn ran in with her pack still on, her boots slipping once before she found traction. She did not waste breath on swearing or shouting. She dropped low, grabbed the sled line, and took the load in short, measured pulls that matched her exhale. Her rhythm turned chaos into steps. "Don't fight the weight," Mara said. "Share it. One step each breath." The nearest cadet stared at her, then copied the rhythm without thinking. The sled eased forward by inches that felt like meters. Riven Jax noticed the change before he saw her face, and he kept moving on the outer edge of the group. He scanned the field and held his pace tight and quiet. His eyes tracked Mara's hands, her stance, and the way she used the slope instead of her spine. Most rookies tried to impress the platform, but Mara tried to keep the sled from tipping. A cadet behind her coughed hard and started to sag, and Mara cut her pace in half. She hooked the cadet's harness and pulled them into the lee of a basalt ridge where the sulfur wind thinned. "Save air," Mara said. "Stand when you can." The cadet nodded, eyes wide, and forced their knees under them. Riven stepped close enough to be heard over the filters. "You trained on high gravity?" Riven asked. Mara checked the cadet's mass seal with a quick press and did not look up. Her touch was precise, like a mechanic checking a gasket. "No," Mara said. "I grew up somewhere that punished panic." Riven blinked at that, unsure what to do with it, and his gaze flicked back to the field. Commandant Vin did not miss any of it. He watched the sled reach the boundary lights, watched the cadets stagger, and watched Mara step back into the wind like it owed her nothing. His wrist tablet flickered with a morning roster. A new line sat there like a fault in metal. "Human." He did not say the word out loud, and he blew the whistle instead. The sound was sharp enough to cut through the grit. "Line up," Vin ordered. "Then run again. If you stop, you are done." The next run started before lungs had time to settle, and they drove the cadets toward the cinder barrens. The ground turned from black stone to loose red gravel that held heat like a stove. Gravity leaned harder here, not because it changed, but because fatigue did. Boots slid and shoulders dipped as cadets angled for the same strip of firmer rock. Two large shapes cut across the flow and took it for themselves. The Korkel brothers moved as a unit, armored in natural plating that made them look built for impact. They did not need to shove, and they chose to shove anyway. Smaller cadets stumbled offline and scrambled back up as. The brothers watched. "Keep your lane," Kor growled. "Earn your space." A thin cadet stumbled into Mara's path, half pushed and half out of air, and Mara shifted to avoid stepping on a hand. That was all the opening Kel needed. He hit her shoulder with his chest, a clean, heavy check meant to send her down the slope. Mara did not brace against him. She let the contact turn her, used the momentum, and stepped sideways onto a patch of loose grit she had already spotted. Kel's next step landed where hers had been. The gravel rolled under his weight like marbles, and his center of mass drifted. His feet fought for grip, and he slid into a shallow trough where the heat pooled. He caught himself with one hand and hissed as the stone burned through his glove. Mara kept running and did not look back until she was past the worst of the slope. She did not smile, and she did not wave. She simply stayed upright. Kor saw it and surged after her, anger turning his breathing loud. He aimed for her ankles this time, a sweep that could break a knee in heavy gravity. Riven was close enough to react, and he snapped a gravity anchor line from his belt. He fired it into a crack in the basalt and pulled the line tight across Kor's path. Kor hit the taut line at speed, and his plated shin caught. His upper body pitched forward, and he went down hard. He carved a furrow in the red grit, and the cadets around him scattered to avoid becoming part of the fall. Riven released the line before it could yank him off balance. He kept moving and kept his tone flat, as if facts were safer than anger. He stayed beside Mara without crowding her. That was reckless, Riven said. It was math, Mara said. Behind them, Kor pushed himself upright, breathing like a furnace. His eyes locked on Mara through the tinted face shield. This isn't over, Kor said. We teach lessons here. Mara kept her pace steady and did not answer him, and Riven matched her rhythm. For the first time, he matched someone else's cadence instead of forcing his own. By late cycle, the academy stopped pretending the danger was symbolic, and they marched the cadets toward an exterior airlock block. Steel doors cut into the rock like teeth, and warning lights strobed in the sulfur haze. Commandant Vin's voice came through a speaker, calm and cold. The instructors did not explain the rules twice. Airlock drill, Vin said. Your team enters, the door closes, anyone outside is outside, anyone inside lies with the oxygen you have. If you wait for permission, you will die. The first team moved, and the inner door cycled open. It sucked at their suits, then slammed shut as soon as the last boot crossed. The second team ran, and a cadet tripped at the threshold. A loose strap tangled, and the cadet fell sideways with one leg still outside. The outer corridor wind hit their exposed seal and screamed like a blade along the edge. The inner door started to close. Mara pivoted without thinking and grabbed the cadet's harness, then yanked. The strap snagged again, harder, and the cadet's boots stuck in the door frame. Riven charged in and hooked his fingers under the strap. He braced one shoulder against the door housing and pulled with a short, brutal motion that ripped the strap free. The cadet rolled through the opening just as the inner door clanged shut. The lock cycled pressure in the room tightened around them. For a few heartbeats, the air tasted thin even through filters, and the cadets sucked at it like they had never trusted oxygen before. One cadet's breathing spiked into a fast, ugly rhythm. Their hands pawed at their mask seal as if the problem was the plastic, not panic. Mara reached out and pressed 2 fingers to the cadet's wrist, then matched their tempo with her own. Follow me, Mara said. In. Hold. Out. Hold. She kept counting until the cadet's shoulders stopped shaking. Someone cursed. Someone laughed sharp and high, then stopped. Mara sat with her back to the wall and forced her hands open and shut once, as if checking that they still belonged to her. Then she began to count her breathing again, steady enough that others started to copy the cadence. Not because she ordered them, but because their bodies needed something to follow. When the pressure equalized and the light turned green, the cadets staggered out into the open corridor. Vin was waiting beyond the line, wrist tablet in hand, eyes unreadable. Riven stepped close to Mara, keeping his voice low. Where did you learn that? Riven asked. Mara wiped grit from her glove and did not try to decorate the answer. She sounded like someone describing weather, not victory. At home, Mara said. Then she started jogging again before the instructors could tell them to. The academy loved momentum, and it punished hesitation. Night did not soften Surtara, and it sharpened it. The barracks lights stayed dim to save power, and keep the cadets half-tired on purpose. Mara lay on her bunk with her boots still on, listening to the hum of filtration and the distant thud of someone vomiting into a drain. Across the room, Riven sat with his back to a support beam, cleaning dust out of a joint seal in silence. Commandant Vin was not in the barracks, and he was in his office alone. A metal ceiling stained by old heat scars hung over a wrist tablet that refused to make sense. He opened the roster again and pulled Mara Quinn's file up. He tried to access the hazard classification field, and the field was blank. It was not redacted, not restricted, and simply missing. It was as if the database had forgotten what to call the place she came from. Vin started a transfer request, fingers moving with practice speed, and his jaw tightened. No human belonged on Surtara, and no human belonged in Obsidian Crucible Academy. It would be cleaner to remove the mistake before it became a body count. A new alert bloomed on his display. The console displayed a line that read, Perimeter Breach. Training Field. Cadets unaccounted. Vin stood so fast his chair scraped, and he pulled up the exterior cameras. On the far edge of the Cinder Barrens, a small cluster of signals flickered and wavered, caught outside the safe boundary. Beyond them, the storm wall rolled in early, a thick band of sulfur haze and particulate that would jam sensors and chew through seals. Protocol offered an option to lock down and let the environment decide. Vin keyed the base channel, voice clipped and controlled. He made the call that looked like strength and felt like risk. Response team, move, Vin said. Cadets with functional legs, follow. In the barracks, the alarm tone hit like a punch, and Mara was already up before it finished rising. She tightened her mask seal, grabbed her pack, and ran. Riven caught up at the door and stayed beside her, as if he had already decided. His breath sounded tight in his mask. You don't even know who is out there? Riven asked. Mara did not slow, and her answer was simple enough to be true. Someone is, Mara said. They hit the yard a sprint, boots hammering into heavy gravity as lights smeared through sulfur haze. On the platform, Vin watched the human run at the front of a group that should have hated her for existing. He lowered his wrist tablet and did not look at the roster. He looked at the storm. On Surtara, the storm hit like grit fired from a cannon, and it turned the yard into a tunnel of moving shadows. Mara ran at the front of the response line, head down and one hand on the guide cable. The sulfur haze swallowed the floodlights, and cadets stumbled and cursed as heavy gravity punished every sideways step. A beacon blinked near the perimeter berm, and 3 signals clustered there, low and drifting. Contact in 30 seconds, Riven said. The first cadet appeared out of the haze on hands and knees, visor filmed yellow. Mara grabbed the harness ring and hauled him upright in 2 short pulls, then shoved him toward the cable. Stay on the line, Mara said. Do not chase lights. A second cadet tried to stand and pitch sideways, and Riven caught him by the pack strap. He dragged him back into the lee of Mara's body and kept him moving. The third was worse, pinned by a torn dummy sled that had flipped in the wind and jammed against his leg. Mara dropped to one knee and slid her glove onto the sled frame. She found the lever point and drove up with her hips, and the frame lifted just enough. Riven yanked the cadet free, and they moved before the wind could steal the moment. The airlock lights loomed through the haze, and the outer door slammed shut behind them with a sound that felt like a verdict. Inside, Vin watched the last helmet cross the threshold and did not praise anyone. He keyed the next schedule and sent it to every wrist tablet in a single push. The Academy did not believe in recovery when pressure could still be applied. The schedule line read like a threat made polite. Orbital shrapnel run would begin at first light with no delays. The next morning, the Academy did not start on the ground, and the cadets were shoved into a staging lock. Packs were stripped down to tether kits and emergency seals, and breath-fogged face shields in the cold. The inner door opened, and the floor tilted as the station rotated under them. Cold bled through the metal, sharp and clean compared to the sulfur outside. Step out when the light turns green, the instructor said. If you drift, you correct. If you panic, you spin. The light changed and gravity vanished, and Mara pushed off and felt her stomach float up into her ribs. For a heartbeat, there was no down, only the black curve of Surtara below and the hard glitter of training lights stitched along the surface. A cadet ahead kicked too hard and started to tumble, and his tether slackened. It snapped tight as it bit into a rail, and the jerk spun him faster. Shrapnel launched, not real fragments, but dense training slugs fired across the hull corridor. They hissed past like knives in a kitchen, tracked, and timed to punish bad angles. The tumbling cadet raised his hands too late, and a slug clipped his forearm. He yelped and twisted harder, and his tether began to fray where it rubbed the rail. Riven moved first and fired his anchor into a frame joint, then locked himself as a pivot. His free hand reached toward Mara without looking. Mara took it and used his locked body to stop her own drift. She planted one boot against the hull plate and pushed along the rail, hand over hand. She stayed in the shadow of a structural fin where the slugs could not reach as easily. The cadet's visor flashed warning icons, and his breathing went ragged, and the tumble turned into pure fear. Mara clipped a secondary line to her waist ring, then hooked the other end to his harness. She pulled him into the dead zone behind the fin with 3 hard draws that made her shoulders burn. "Eyes on me," Mara said. "Breathe with the count." He tried, and his spin slowed as the line stabilized him. A slug struck the rail near Mara's glove and threw off sparks that floated like bright dust. She did not flinch, and she checked the frayed tether and saw the fibers. Thinning. She made a choice fast enough to look like instinct. "Cut it," Riven said. Mara nodded once and severed the damaged segment, then replaced it with her spare. Her fingers moved fast despite the cold, and the cadet stopped shaking enough to grab the rail. They moved again, one body and 2 anchor points, quiet and ugly and efficient. When the run ended, the inner lock swallowed them back into air and weight. The cadets collapsed to their knees, coughing as if oxygen had become thick. Riven stayed standing and looked at Mara's hands, raw where the glove seams had bitten. "You didn't hesitate," Riven said. Mara flexed her fingers once and let the pain stay in the background. "I didn't have time," Mara said. By midday, orbital shrapnel run became something else, and the Korkel brothers were assigned to Mara's bracket. They were close enough to reach her lines in the crowd. They did not speak to her, and they did not need to. When the light turned green again, Mara pushed out with her team and felt the familiar float. She set her first anchor clean and reached for the next rail, and a tug hit her waist ring wrong and sudden. Her secondary line went slack. She turned and saw the cut, a clean slice through the spare she had used earlier. The line drifted away like a dead snake. Her team began to drift off corridor, pulled by a slow rotation field toward open space. One cadet grabbed at nothing and started to spin. Riven did not shout, and he snapped his anchor into the nearest frame joint and slammed the lock closed with both hands. The recoil yanked his shoulders, but stopped the drift for a heartbeat. "Clip to me," Riven said. Mara forced herself along the hull against the pull, and every movement was expensive. Not because of gravity, but because control was the only thing between them and open nothing. She reached the first cadet, caught his harness ring, and clipped him to Riven's anchor line. The second was worse, rotating like a thrown tool. Mara timed her move and caught the tether as it swung past, then wrapped it around her forearm to stop the spin. The force stung up to her elbow, and her hand started to tremble, but she kept moving. She crawled back toward the rail, clustered where the cut had happened, found the junction, and rebuilt the line with a new knot and a fresh lock. One mistake here would send someone out into nothing. Riven held the anchor like a stake in a flood, jaw clenched and eyes never leaving Mara. When the run finally ended, the cadets poured back into the lock with masks fogged and fingers numb. The Korkel brothers arrived last, calm as if nothing had happened. Kor stopped close enough that Mara could smell heated polymer from his suit seams. "Out there, the void does not care who you are," Kor said. "Next time your line goes slack, nobody has to touch it." Kel laughed once, short, then turned away as if the matter was already settled. Riven took one step forward, then forced himself to stop. Fighting here would only give them an excuse, and excuses were oxygen for people like that. Mara said nothing, and the silence made the threat stick. In the control room, Vin replayed the external feed at half speed and watched the line go slack. He watched Mara drift and correct, and he watched Riven lock an anchor that should have been locked by protocol. He also saw the camera blind spot where a gloved hand could have made a clean cut. He had suspicion, but he did not yet have a name he could prosecute. Down in the bay, Mara peeled her glove off and found a shallow burn along her palm. Riven took a seal patch from his kit and pressed it into place without asking. "You are bleeding," Riven said. "It's nothing," Mara said. "It is data," Riven said, and the words sounded like he had stolen them from Vin. Mara held his gaze for a beat longer than necessary, then looked away toward the next briefing light. Magma vent gauntlet began with heat that came from below. The cadets were dropped onto a basalt field where the rock was pocked and hollow. Thin vents exhaled in irregular bursts, each breath hot enough to blister through a boot sole if you stood still. Route markers led across a jagged crack, a fissure that widened and narrowed like a mouth. The ground around it looked solid until you stepped wrong and felt it ring empty. A cadet in front tested a slab, then committed, and the slab broke. His leg punched through to the knee, and the rock clamped around his shin as if it had teeth. He screamed once, short, then bit it back as heat licked up from the crack. Corkel slowed, looked down, and kept walking. "Leave him," Cor said. "He chose wrong." Mara did not answer, and she dropped her pack and pulled a lever bar from the side strap. She slid under the broken slab and found a purchase point. Riven was already at her shoulder, and he set his tether line around a basalt spur. He fed it to her without a word. Mara looped the line under the trap cadet's harness and cinched it tight, then drove the lever bar down using the spur as a fulcrum. The slab rose by inches. Riven hauled on the line in short pulls, timing each pull with Mara's lever stroke. The cadet's leg came free with a wet scrape, and Mara dragged him backward out of the heat zone. She shoved him into the shade of a taller ridge, and his face was gray behind the visor. His hands shook like he could not decide what to do with them. "Check your boots, Seal," Mara said. "Then breathe." Riven watched her for a second, sweat floating in his mask before it could smear. He did not sound impressed, and he sounded worried. "You're reckless," Riven said. Mara wiped grit from her glove and met his eyes without blinking. "No," Mara said. "I ran the numbers." For the first time, Riven's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then he turned away to keep moving. The Academy did not reward pauses, even the humankind. That night, the Academy turned the lights off on purpose, and Predator Blackout Night began with a sensor kill. The cadets' wrist tablets went dark. Range beacons died, and even the instructor drones pulled back until only the wind and the distant hiss of vents remained. Then something moved in the rocks. The predators were native to Surtara, low and fast, hunting by heat gradients. The Academy used their patterns, not their teeth, but the cadets did not know that in the dark. They only heard the scrape and the sudden silence when a pack stopped making noise. A simulated hostage beacon blinked once, then went dead. It forced teams to move by memory and terrain, and one group panicked and ran. Boots hammered rock, and body heat spiked, and the scraping turned into pursuit. Mara dropped flat behind a cold slab and hissed at the nearest cadet. Her voice stayed low because volume was heat. "Kill your heat," Mara said. "Turn off anything warm." Hands fumbled, and someone sobbed once and swallowed it. Riven grabbed a cadet by the shoulder and shoved him into the shadow line behind a rock fin. His breath was loud, and he forced it down as if he could punish his own lungs. Mara found a narrow crack where cold air spilled out like a thin river. She waved them toward it one by one, keeping bodies close to stone. A predator shape crossed the open ground, a darker darkness sliding over darker rock. It paused, head tilting, tasting the air. Riven stepped out just enough to draw it, then snapped back behind the fin. The shape lunged and struck the rock edge instead, and a claw caught Riven's forearm on the rebound. Suit fabric tore, and blood floated in a round bead before it smeared under his glove. Riven did not make a sound, and Mara saw it anyway. In the crack, she pressed a bandage seal over the tear with 2 firm touches. "Keep it closed," Mara said. "Do not flex." Riven nodded, eyes fixed on the dark outside. They reached the hostage marker by crawling, not running, and the hostage dummy was a heavy mass wrapped in heat film. Mara killed the film and dragged the mass into the cold crack with Riven on the other end. They waited with backs to stone while the scraping circled and drifted away. In the thin dark, Riven spoke so quietly Mara almost missed it. He sounded like someone asking about weather, not bravery. "Earth," Riven said. "Is it really worse than this?" Mara breathed once, slow, then answered like it was a fact, not a boast. Her voice stayed even, and that made it heavier. "Back home, warnings fall like rain," Mara said. "You grow up hearing them." Riven held the silence for a long moment, and claws ticked against rock outside, searching for heat that was no longer there. Inside the crack, Mara and Riven shared the same air and the same steady count, and neither of them moved away. After blackout night, the academy did not ease up. It pushed the cadets underground where panic had nowhere to vent. The first alarm did not scream, and it clicked once soft enough to miss. A cadet missed it anyway because he was forcing a jammed hatch wheel to turn inside the undercore sector. The wheel refused, metal grinding on metal, and the sealed corridor held every sound like a throat. Mara felt the change before the second click, and her lungs had to pull a little harder. Her mask seal did not leak, but the air itself thinned. Riven looked up from the panel he was rewiring and watched her pause, not freeze, pause. She tilted her head as if listening to a distant engine, and the wall display flickered. The console displayed a line that read, "Oxygen variance. Minor." The numbers were still inside the safe band. In the control room above, Vin saw the same readout and did not flinch. Minor dips happened in undercore drills, and sensors drifted as filters lagged and cadets overbreathed. He keyed the instructor channel. "Continue," Vin said. "Stay on task." Below, the corridor lights held steady, pale and flat, and the team moved deeper single file. Packs scraped rock, and the undercore pressed in like a long mission with no sky, no wind, and no easy exits. 10 minutes later, the third alarm click came faster. A smaller species cadet stopped and pressed both hands to his mask. His chest rose too fast, and his eyes went wide behind the visor. "I can't," the cadet said. "It isn't sealing." Mara stepped into his line of sight, so he could not look away. She did not touch him yet, and her voice stayed low. "Look at me," Mara said. "Slow your breaths." The cadet did not slow, and he pulled at the mask straps, making the seal worse. Riven moved in and caught his wrists, not hard, just enough to stop the tearing motion. "Stop fighting it," Riven said. "You're burning air." That word, air, landed like a match in dry grass. Another cadet heard it and started to cough, and a third laughed once sharp and wrong, then turned it into a gasp. The corridor did not change, but the people did. Mara dropped her pack and snapped open the emergency mask kit clipped to her waist. She did not announce it, and she acted like time was already gone. "Down," Mara said. "Sit low." Some species learned it earlier than others because cold air pooled lower in sealed spaces. Thinner air climbed, and pride made people waste what they could not replace. Most cadets hesitated, and Mara did not argue. She hooked a finger into a cadet's shoulder strap and pulled him down. He resisted for a beat, then dropped, breathing loud. Riven followed her without a question. He pushed 2 cadets toward the floor line, then planted himself at the corridor bend. He used his body as a barrier so panic could not spread forward. The oxygen readout dipped again, still not lethal, just trending. A large figure pushed through the line behind them. Korkel, both brothers, moved with the calm of people who believed size solved problems. Kor looked at Mara on the floor and made a sound like contempt. "This is a drill," Kor said. "Stand." Mara kept her eyes on the wall display and watched the slope of the number, not the color. Her answer was flat, and that made it dangerous. It stopped being a drill when the air changed, Mara said. "Sit down." Kel stepped closer, and the corridor felt smaller, and Riven shifted 1 foot ready but controlled. There was no room for ego here, only margins. The fourth alarm click became a steady tone because the system decided the trend mattered. Somewhere behind them, a pressured door cycled with a deep thud that made everyone look back. The door did not open again. The jam happened 2 corridors away at Gate 7. A team was on the far side, sealed in a narrow run with no side alcoves, and their communications came through as broken audio. Words arrived without endings. "We're pinned," someone said. "Door won't open." The signal cracked, then returned thinner. Vin leaned forward in his chair and sent a reset pulse to Gate 7. The door motors whined, then stopped, and there was no movement. The jam held, and protocol offered clean options, and none of them were kind. They could abort the drill, or vent the sector and risk pressure shock and structural damage. Vin chose a middle path and initiated partial reroute from an adjacent block to buy time. It was a calculated theft from one zone to feed another, and he accepted the trade. Down in Undercore, Mara felt the air shift, a faint rush, then stillness. The wall display stuttered, then stabilized. At a worse number, not because it dropped, but because the sensor finally caught up, a cadet near the back started to stand. Panic wanted motion, and motion wanted air. Mara grabbed his pack strap and pulled him down again. "Stay," Mara said. "Save it." Riven checked the emergency mask kit and saw the truth that always lived inside gear. There were only so many, and there was never enough. A new alert flashed on Mara's wrist tablet, and it gave the summary without mercy. Gate 7 jammed, team isolated, and the time to breach unknown. Core heard it too and smiled under his visor like the universe had proven his point. "That's what this place is," Core said. "Some people don't make it." Mara did not answer him, and she turned to the manifold panel embedded in the corridor wall. It was a simple unit built for trainees, with 3 valves and a visible readout of distribution across corridor segments. She saw it at once, and some species would fade faster at the same oxygen percentage. They would lose function first, panic first, and die first. Mara moved her hand to the valve controls, and Riven caught the motion. His voice dropped because he knew this was not a discussion for the room. "What are you doing?" Riven asked. "Making the loss smaller," Mara said. She adjusted the flow so lower tolerance masks would get more feed, and she reduced the line to her own segment by a fraction. It was not enough to trip an alarm, but enough to matter. Riven's eyes flicked to the numbers, and he understood, and his jaw tightened. "You can't," Riven said. "You'll drop." Mara pressed the valve home and did not look at him. "I won't drop first," Mara said. In the control room, Vin saw the shift as a spike on the distribution graph, and it was not random. It was deliberate. He opened the channel and stripped his voice down to the core. "Equalize the flow," Vin said. "Now." Mara keyed her microphone and answered like obedience, then moved like math. "Copy," Mara said. She turned the valve back, but not all the way, and she left the split biased by a small margin. It would not show as defiance, only noise, and she bet her life on the size of that noise. Time dragged in a sealed corridor, and minutes stretched into long, ugly shapes. Gate 7 stayed jammed, and the isolated team fed fewer words into the communications. Breaths became the message. A cadet beside Mara started to tremble and fumbled at his belt, reaching for an emergency mask that did not exist. Mara slid her spare toward him like passing a tool, and she did it with no ceremony and no speech. The cadet hesitated, then took it with both hands, ashamed and relieved at the same time. Riven watched her give away her safety and felt something hot rise under his ribs. And it was not romance, not yet. It was fear at watching someone spend herself like a resource. He leaned close to her ear, and his voice sounded almost angry because it was the only way he could keep it steady. "Stop," Riven said. "You're not required to do this." Mara kept her gaze on the manifold readout and did not soften the point. "Nobody is required," Mara said. "That's the point." A new sound rolled through the corridor, not an alarm, but a cutting tool, and vibration came through the floor as a steady growl. Rescue teams were on the far side of Gate 7, chewing through the frame. Dust shook loose from seams overhead. The isolated team's communications came back in bursts. "I see light," someone said. "Door is opening." A cadet in Mara's corridor tried to stand again, and he made it halfway before his knees folded. Gravity did not forgive low oxygen. Riven caught him before his head hit the wall and dragged him down to the floor line. He pressed him there like it was an anchor point. "Stay with me," Riven said. "Count out." The cadet tried to match Riven's pace, and it did not work, and Mara reached over and set 2 fingers on the cadet's wrist. She counted in a slow cadence, softer and steadier than before, and the breathing slowed enough to stop making the problem worse. Ven watched the feeds and hated the delay, and he ran the abort sequence in his mind, then rejected it again. If he vented too hard, he could kill more people, and if he waited too long, he could kill the ones already trapped. He chose the risk he could measure and gave the order. "Full breach," Ven said. "Get that door open." The cutting sound surged, then stopped, and a deep metallic crack echoed through undercore. The jam gave way. Air rushed, not fresh and not clean, just more of it. Rescue lights spilled into the corridor like a sunrise in a coffin. Medics moved in fast with masks already in hand, and they tagged bodies by function, not by rank. Mara stood last and forced herself upright with one hand on the manifold panel for balance. Her vision narrowed at the edges into a gray tightening. Riven reached for her elbow. "You're done," Riven said. Mara tried to step forward and her knee buckled, and she made one more attempt, stubborn as a machine. Then her legs quit. Riven caught her before she hit the floor, and the impact jolted through his arms and up into his shoulders. He felt how light she was and how heavy gravity made her anyway. "Medic!" Riven shouted. "Now!" "She's down." Mara's head rolled against his chest plate, and her lips moved once soundless. She was still conscious enough to fight sleep, and that fight cost air she did not have. Riven tightened his grip and whispered, almost angry. "Don't go quiet on me," Riven said. Mara woke under white light and a steady machine hum, and the medical bay smelled like disinfectant and hot plastic. Filters clicked in a clean pattern, and gravity felt the same, but the air felt less hostile. Or maybe her lungs were just grateful. Her throat burned and her hands ached, and she blinked twice to clear the blur. A medic leaned in to check her eyes, and Mara spoke before the medic could. "Are they out?" Mara asked. The medic paused, surprised by the question, then answered. "Yes," the medic said. "All teams extracted." Mara closed her eyes for one slow breath, then opened them again like relief was only a step, not a finish line. Ven stood at the foot of the bed and did not look like a man who had slept. His coat was still, but his face carried small tension lines that had not been there before. He chose honesty because the alternative was another death. "I made the call to continue," Ven said. "It was mine, not the system's." Mara studied him, then the ceiling, and her voice stayed quiet. She sounded tired, not forgiving. "Systems fail," Mara said. "People decide what the failure costs." Ven swallowed and nodded once like he had been hit and refused to fall. Outside the curtain, Riven stood with his hands clenched at his sides. He had washed the blood off his forearm from blackout night, but the scratch still showed. He did not look at it, and he watched Mara through the gap with eyes hard. Anger sat in him hot and clean, not at her, but at the fact she had done it without telling him. When the medic stepped away, Riven moved in. He did not speak at first, and he took Mara's hand careful, as if she might shatter. Mara looked at their hands, then at his face, and her expression softened for a beat. Riven held on for 3 breaths, then released her hand like it was a mistake he could not afford. He stepped back because he did not want his concern to become another weight she had to carry. Ven watched the exchange and understood more than he wanted to. Then he turned and walked out. He went straight to his office and opened the training schedule, then made changes without announcing them. Less glory and more thresholds, more shared load drills, more recovery practice. More instruction on when to stop before stopping became collapse. He saved the file and sat still, listening to the building breathe. Word traveled anyway. In the barracks, Korkel stood with a small cluster of cadets who liked the old way. They liked a world where toughness meant pushing until someone broke, and they called it fair because it made them feel safe. "They're softening it," Kor said. Because of her. Kel's eyes narrowed and his voice stayed low. And because he let it happen, Kel said. A cadet asked, careful, because questions had become dangerous. What do we do? The cadet asked. Kor smiled and answered like he was offering wisdom. We remind them what this academy is, Kor said. We remind them with results. That night, a new bulletin hit every wrist tablet, and it carried a different kind of threat. It announced a final evaluation update with an opposing force team, authorized stun rounds, and real capture. The message ended with a simple rule. If you were taken, you failed. Riven read the notice in silence and looked across the room at Mara's empty bunk. She was still in medical, and he did not like the shape of the new threat. It was not an accident, and it was a choice made by people. On Surtara, choices killed faster than storms. Riven heard the stun round before he saw it, and it snapped past his helmet and punched into the rock beside Mara. Dust jumped in a tight cone, and the sound was too clean to be debris. It was a deliberate shot. Now, Mara said. She did not shout, and she dropped and pulled the nearest cadet with her. The basalt gorge narrowed around them, black stone on both sides, heat rising from cracks underfoot. Above, the sky was a dull smear behind sulfur haze. A second round hit, then a third, and the opposing force team was already in high ground. They used the walls like rails and moved like they had rehearsed this on real bodies. They were not trying to scare anyone, and they were trying to tag and take. The team behind Mara hesitated, looking for instructions, and that hesitation was oxygen for the enemy. Kor and Kel were the first to move, and they moved the wrong way. Kor shoved a smaller cadet toward the widest part of the gorge, right where the stone opened into a clean line of sight. Kel followed and blocked the narrow side path with his body like a door. Go, Kor growled. That way. Mara looked once and saw the trap and the angle, and she saw the opposing force waiting for bodies to commit. She grabbed the guideline on the left wall and yanked the team toward a tighter cut, a slit between slabs where the stone leaned inward. Not that way, Mara said. This way. A cadet stared at her, fear making his voice thin. We will get pinned, the cadet asked. We are already pinned, Mara said. Move. Riven did not argue, and he moved to the rear and pushed the last cadet through the slit. His eyes stayed on Kor and Kel, and he saw Kel smile inside his visor like the outcome was already written. The slit opened into a low passage with a cold draft, and the stone here was older and denser. Heat signatures dropped fast. Mara kept going without pausing, keeping the team in a tight line. A stun round clipped the edge of the passage and threw sparks, and the opposing force had adjusted. Fast! Mara pulled a small packet from her belt, a thermal decoy strip. She slapped it onto a loose rock and kicked the rock out into the open corridor behind them. The strip flared warm in a smooth curve like a moving body. Mara did not look back when she spoke, and she kept it practical. Keep her heat low, Mara said. No heavy breaths. No sprint. Riven watched the decoy drift and understood the plan, and he felt his chest tighten with something like respect. If the opposing force tracked heat, the decoy was bait, and if they tracked motion, the rock would draw timing off. The first opposing force boots hit the open corridor and helmet lamps swept. Sensors pinged, and they chased the flare, not the people. Mara led her team deeper, then cut right, then left, choosing turns that forced the opposing force to guess. A cadet began to cough and the air was dry, and fear made it worse. Mara tapped the cadet's shoulder and pointed down, and the cadet lowered his head and breathed into his sleeve quieter. Riven heard the change and felt a tight release in his chest. This was not leadership with a raised voice, and it was control passed hand to hand. Behind them, the opposing force realized the trick and shouts echoed through the gorge short and sharp. Stun rounds started to bracket the passage mouth again, and the net tightened. Mara stopped at a fork where 3 cracks met, and the choice looked clean only to people who did not know angles. One path went upward into sunlight, one went deeper into shadow, and one was a crawl. Kor appeared at the fork blocking the crawl route with plated shoulders, and Kel stood behind him holding his stun carbine low. He held it like he belonged in the opposing force more than in the candidate line. Wrong turn, Kor said. Mara looked at him, then looked past him at the upper path and saw a small heat shimmer forming. She saw the opposing force shaping there, ready to cut them off, and she did not waste breath on arguments. "Move," Mara said. Kor laughed once and turned the sound into a dare. "Make me," Kor said. Mara slapped a thermal strip on Kor's chest plate and pushed him backward into Kel. The strip flared hot in an instant, and both brothers jerked, instinct fighting heat risk. For 1 second, they forgot to block. Riven shoved the first cadet into the crawl route, then the next, and Mara went last. She slid on her stomach into tight stone, and her shoulders scraped rock. A stun round hit the edge of the crawl, opening and splashed energy against basalt, missing her by inches. As the team crawled, the heat decoy on Kor's chest pulled opposing force fire to the wrong angle. The gorge behind them lit with crackling impacts, and Riven stayed close behind Mara, matching her pace in the narrow dark. He realized something then, and it was as clear as gravity. Nobody had appointed her commander, yet everyone moved when she moved. They lost the opposing force for 7 minutes. Then the hostage beacon chirped. A cadet ahead froze, voice tight with hope and fear. "That is our team," the cadet said. "That is one of ours." Mara lifted 2 fingers, a silent signal to stay low. Riven crawled past one cadet to reach her shoulder, and he waited for her eyes. They reached a wider chamber where the stone dropped into a shallow bowl. In the center, one cadet knelt with hands on his helmet, stunned and shaking. An opposing force operator stood behind him with a stun carbine pressed to the cadet's backplate. Another operator held a portable sensor puck, and the puck pulsed, searching for heat and movement. A third operator faced the entrance, ready to fire. The hostage operator spoke into the chamber, voice amplified and confident. "Route change. Now," the operator said. "You go up. You give us your fastest, or we keep him." The cadet on the ground made a small sound. Not words, just air trying to become a plea. Korkel stepped into view on the upper rim, looking pleased, and they were not tied and not threatened. They were part of the shape of this ambush. Riven felt his hands tighten, and he wanted to rush, and he knew that was how people got tagged. Mara did not rush, and she turned her head a fraction toward Riven. "Cut the puck," Mara whispered. Riven nodded once and slid along the wall using stone as cover. He pulled a small cutter tool from his belt, the kind used for suit repairs and tether work. The sensor puck pulsed again, and the chamber held its breath. Mara stepped forward into the open with hands low and visible, then took one slow step, then another. She let the opposing force see her and commit to her. "Let him stand," Mara said. The hostage operator laughed. "You do not bargain here," the operator said. "You comply." Mara kept walking and did not raise her voice. "You are burning time," Mara said. "Your oxygen budget is not mine." The operator's helmet tilted, and he did not like being reminded of margins. Riven reached the puck from behind a rock rib and severed the power lead in one motion. The puck went dark, and the chamber changed instantly, and the opposing force lost their clean picture. They still had eyes and lamps, but the advantage shrank. Mara moved on that beat, and she lunged straight. She hit the hostage operator's wrist with the edge of her forearm, knocked the carbine offline, and hooked her other arm onto the cadet's harness ring. She dragged the cadet sideways out of the shot lane. The third operator fired anyway, and the stun round slammed into stone where Mara had been a moment ago. Riven came out of the shadows behind the third operator and drove his shoulder into the operator's back. The operator hit the wall and dropped his weapon. Mara yanked the hostage cadet to his feet, and her words were a command with no decoration. "Run," Mara said. The cadet ran, stumbling at first, then finding his legs. The hostage operator recovered fast and swung his carbine up again, helmet lamp flaring into Mara's eyes. Mara threw her tether line, and the metal hook snapped around the operator's ankle. She pulled once and gravity did the rest, and the operator went down hard pinned by his own weight. Kor surged from the upper rim, dropping into the chamber like a falling wall. Kel followed and blocked the exit path. "This is where you stop," Kor said. Mara stood between Kor and the fleeing cadet and did not back up, and she did not puff her chest. She changed her stance to conserve. Riven stepped beside her and flicked his eyes to the exits, and he saw opposing force regrouping on the rim. They were closing their net again. Kor swung first, a heavy hook meant to crush her shoulder into stone. Mara let the punch pass and stepped inside the arc, then grabbed Kor's forearm and turned her hips. She used heavy gravity like leverage, and Kor's own mass pulled him forward. Mara locked his elbow and drove him down with position, not strength. Kor hit the ground on one knee and surprise flashed behind his visor. Kel rushed Riven and tried to tag him with a stun round at close range. Riven knocked the carbine aside and took a hit to the ribs that made his breath jump, but he stayed upright. Mara did not chase Kel. She kept Kor pinned and shifted her grip, then forced Kor's plated arm behind him until the joints stopped moving. Kor growled, trying to turn it into dominance. "You cannot hold me," Kor said. Mara did not need to sound brave to sound certain. "I did not have to," Mara said. "Gravity does." She shoved his faceplate down toward a hot patch of basalt, where vent heat bled through cracks, not enough to burn through the suit. It was enough to make him feel the cost. Kor froze. Riven kicked Kel's carbine away and shoved Kel back into the bowl wall, and Kel stumbled, then regained balance. A stun round from above cracked into the floor between Mara and Riven, and the opposing force had recovered their timing. The net tightened again. Mara released Kor and backed away, not giving him the angle he wanted. She turned her head to Riven and made the call that would cost her. "Go," Mara said. Riven grabbed the hostage cadet's arm and pulled him toward the exit slit. Kor stood and pointed at Mara, rage heavy in his breathing. "You are not leaving," Kor said. Mara looked at him once, then turned and ran, leading the opposing force away from the team by choosing the noisier path. Riven understood what she was doing, and he hated it, and he did it anyway. He dragged the cadet through the slit and shoved him forward, and stun rounds snapped behind them like hail. The exit opened into a steep ledge above a long drop. Riven saw it too late. A stun round hit his upper arm and locked his muscles into a hard spasm. His legs stuttered and he fell toward the ledge, and loose grit slid under his boot. The drop yawned below, black and endless, and heat shimmer rose from cracks that could cook a suit if you landed wrong. Riven tried to grab the wall, and his fingers would not obey. Mara spun back when she heard the change in his breathing. She saw him tilt, and she saw the ledge. She ran straight at him. A stun round snapped past her cheek, and another hit stone near her boot. Mara grabbed Riven's harness ring and threw her own weight backward. Gravity caught both of them, and they slammed into the wall instead of going over the edge. Riven gasped, pain and electricity mixing into a sick blur. Mara held him tight against the stone until the spasm eased enough for him to stand. Riven stared at her and tried to turn it into an argument. "You should have kept running," Riven said. Mara shook her head once and did not apologize. "I did not leave you," Mara said. She said it like a rule, not like a poem. Opposing force boots hammered closer and lights swept the ledge. Riven swallowed and made a choice that felt like stepping off a familiar world. "You decide," Riven said. "Where do we go?" Mara did not hesitate, and she grabbed his wrist and pulled him into a narrow crack angling downward. The crack was ugly and tight, and it was also cold. They slid and scraped and dropped into a low tunnel under the ridge, and the opposing force shots ricocheted above them wasted. The team regrouped at a marker pole near the finish corridor, all present, all moving, all breathing hard. The hostage cadet was there alive and shaking. Mara reached the marker last with Riven beside her, half using her shoulder. Nobody cheered because nobody had air for it. A drone hovered above and flashed green, and completion was confirmed. The opposing force arrived seconds later too late to capture, and their operator looked at the green light, then at Mara, then back at his own team. He did not smile. Vin met them at the line and did not congratulate anyone. He looked past bruises and scraped armor, and he looked at the data feed. By evening, the evidence finally had a shape, and the external hull camera from Orbital Shrapnel Run captured a gloved hand near Mara's spare line. The timestamp matched the cut. The anchor log showed the same pair of signatures. In the wrong place at the wrong second. Korkel sat in the review bay silent now, and their confidence had no oxygen left. Vin stood in front of them, wrist tablet in hand, and his voice carried no theater. You tried to remove a candidate by making the environment do your work, Vin said. Core lifted his chin and tried to make the old belief sound like law. This academy is meant to break the weak, Core said. Vin's eyes stayed cold, and he corrected the premise. It is meant to filter skill, Vin said. Not sabotage. He tapped the tablet once, and the decision posted to the roster instantly. Corkel were out. No speeches and no ceremony. 2 names removed and 2 doors closed. The next day, graduation was as plain as the barracks walls. Mara stood in line with the others, and there was no special banner and no spotlight. A certificate in a thin case issued one by one. When her turn came, Vin handed it over and held her gaze for a beat longer than protocol required. You stayed inside the margins when others did not, Vin said. Mara took the case with both hands and did not pretend it was anything but survival. I stayed alive, Mara said. Riven stood a step behind her, watching her like she was not a person anymore. She was a whole environment that had raised her. He did not understand Earth yet. He only knew he wanted to. Mara packed like the room might flood, and she shoved the thin certificate case into her duffel. She cinched the straps until her fingers ached, and she breathed like the air could still turn on her. Outside the door, Boots passed, then came back, then stopped. Riven knocked once and stepped in without waiting for permission. His left sleeve was still stiff where the seal patch had set, and he looked at Mara's bag, then at the bruises on her knuckles. You won, Riven said. Mara tugged the zipper shut and answered without heat. I finished, Mara said. Riven's jaw worked as if he had another sentence. Then he chose a different one. What is Earth really like? Riven asked. Mara did not smile, and she sat on the edge of the bunk and rolled her shoulders once testing pain. She spoke in short images, the way you describe weather too. Someone who has never seen rain. It is loud, Mara said. Not the people, the warnings. Riven stayed standing and kept his hands away from her, as if touch might change the way she carried herself. Mara kept going, and her voice made ordinary sound dangerous. Storms that erase streets, Mara said. Power that drops for hours. Sirens that mean you pick up your bag and go. Air that tastes wrong for weeks, Mara said. Water you boil because you do not trust it. Then Monday comes, Mara said, and people still show up to work. Riven stared at her unmoving and said the only comparison he had. That sounds like training, Riven said. It is life, Mara said. You do it enough times, and your body stops asking for applause. Riven exhaled slowly, as if he had been holding air without noticing. So you were not calm because you did not care? Riven asked. Mara shook her head and let the truth sit bare. I care the whole time, Mara said. I just did not have room to show it. The barracks hum filled the silence, and Riven's eyes dropped to the certificate case on her bag. He looked back at Mara with a careful kind of confusion. You do not look proud, Riven said. Mara shrugged. I feel tired, Mara said. That is all. Riven stepped closer, then stopped himself, and his voice went quiet. I watched you go back from me, Riven said. Mara met his gaze. I would do it again, Mara said. Riven swallowed. That is the part one do not understand, Riven said. Mara lifted the bag and set it by the door. You will, Mara said, if you stop treating it like a story. A chime cut through the barrack speakers, and it was not an alarm. The console displayed a line that read, Candidate Quinn. Report to administrative review. Now, Riven's eyes narrowed. After graduation? Riven asked. Mara's expression did not change. Especially after, Mara said. The administrative hallways were warmer than the training zones, and that made them feel worse. 2 Helion Vanguard officers waited beside a table with a wrist tablet and a small seal stamp. Their uniforms were crisp in a way that never survived the field. Behind them, a wall display showed Mara's profile and her hazard field still blank. Candidate Quinn, the senior officer said, you will sign a confidentiality pledge. Mara did not sit. About what? Mara asked. About classification data, the officer said. About your origin hazard tier. About internal incidents. Mara looked at the tablet, and the pledge was short, and the threat was not. If you refuse, the officer said, your file will be adjusted for public stability. Certain details will be reinterpreted, the officer said. Your graduation will remain valid, but your record will change. Riven's hand twitched near his belt, then relaxed. He was not armed, and he knew what the room was built for. Mara placed her duffel on the floor. No, Mara said. The junior officer blinked. Excuse me, the junior officer asked. Mara did not raise her voice. No, Mara said. You do not get to erase the price and keep the result. She pulled a data chip from her pocket and set it on the table, and the sound was small but final. Rescue feed from the perimeter storm, Mara said. External hull footage from orbital. Manifold logs from undercore. Medical timestamps, Mara said. A timeline. The mistakes. The fixes. The names of the people who carried the cost, Mara said. The senior officer's mouth tightened. This is not your role, the senior officer said. It became my role when I had to breathe less so others could breathe more, Mara said. The officer leaned forward. You are not accusing Helion, the officer said. I'm handing you data, Mara said. Do what you want with it, but you will not silence me with paperwork. A door opened behind them, and Vin walked in with his coat plain and his eyes tired. He looked at the pledge, then at the chip, then at the officers. I authorize the undercore continuation, Vin said. I will sign the incident statement. I will attach her data as supporting evidence. The senior officer stiffened. Commandant, this will trigger oversight, the senior officer said. It should, Vin said. If you hide the model errors, you will kill candidates you have not met yet. The room went still, and the senior officer slid the pledge back toward Mara slower now. This is bigger than you think, the senior officer said. Mara nodded. It always is, Mara said. Riven watched Vin, then Mara, then the door, measuring where the real risk lived. For the first time since arriving on Surtara, he saw fear in a place that did not involve gravity or storms. Outside the hall, Vin stopped Mara and Riven with a small gesture, and he did not offer comfort. He offered clarity. Helion will not like this, Vin said. Ma adjusted here base trap. I did not come here to be liked, Mara said. Vin looked at Riven. And you? Vin asked. Riven answered without pause. I want to see Earth, Riven said. Vin's eyes narrowed. Why? Vin asked. Because your academy did not teach me what I just saw, Riven said. I need the source. Vin held the silence for a beat, then nodded once. Submit a travel request, Vin said. Do it clean. Do it fast. The launch order was a single line on a tablet. Passenger clearance with destination Earth. One seat marked for Mara Quinn, and one additional seat approved under exchange observation. Riven read the line twice, as if it might change. They approved me, Riven said. They approved a reason, Mara said. Do not make me into one. Riven looked at her. What do you want me to be? Riven asked. Mara answered without softness and without cruelty. A person who listens, Mara said. A person who does not call me strange just to make himself feel safe. Riven nodded. I will not treat you like an exception, Riven said. Mara watched his face, searching for performance, and she found none. They signed. The shuttle ride up was short and violent, and Surtara fell away beneath them like a bruised world. A thin veil of sulfur cloud clung to it, as if it refused to let go. Dock clamps caught the transport with a hard jolt, and station lights turned the cabin into pale metal. When a main hatch sealed, Riven stood in the aisle and stared at the inner door like a point of no return. Mara pulled her harness tight. You can still back out, Mara said. Riven shook his head. If I do, I will spend the rest of my life pretending I understand you, Riven said. The ship engine spooled, not a roar, but a steady push that pressed them into their seats. Days later, Earth filled the forward display, and it was not a clean sphere of blue comfort. It was layered. Thick cloud bands wrapped the planet like gauze, and lightning strobed inside a storm spiraling over an ocean. Sunlight flashed off a dense net of satellites and relay mirrors in low orbit. Riven leaned closer to glass. That is a lot of hardware, Riven said. Because we expect things to break, Mara said. A warning tone sounded, and the pilot did not curse, and he adjusted like it was routine. Weather diversion, the pilot said. We are shifting to a secondary corridor. Hold! The ship rolled, and the storm on the screen moved like a living map. The communications channel crackled with traffic fast and practiced, as if reroutes were a normal morning. Riven felt the change in his gut, not fear, but a new kind of respect. Mara exhaled, half relief and half acceptance. "Welcome to my home," Mara said. Riven watched the clouds swallow the horizon and understood the difference at last. Surtara tried to kill you the same way every day, and Earth did it differently. And people learned to live inside the changes. Surtara tried to break Mara with weight, heat, and rules that pretended to be fair. It failed, not because she was indestructible, but because she never confused survival with spectacle. Vin watched the shuttle vanish and understood something he should have learned years earlier. A Deathworld is not always the worst world. Sometimes the worst world is the one that changes its mind every hour and still expects you to show up. Riven stood beside Mara as Earth rose beneath them, wrapped in storms and stitched with satellites, and he did not feel brave. He felt small and strangely grateful, because on that world danger was not a test you passed once. It was the background noise of ordinary life. Humans did not win by being loud. They won by adjusting again and again, until survival became a habit. If you want to see what happens when Riven steps onto Earth for the first time, and what he learns about the quiet strength humans never brag about, stay with me for the next chapter. Before you go, please take a second to support the channel. Like the video if you felt the tension. Share it with a friend who loves hard science fiction and human resilience. And subscribe so you do not miss the Earth arc that starts next.